Hello and welcome. I'm Nihar Vaidya along with Raghu Padma for UNC-ACM. Joining us today is Dr. Fred Brooks, an American computer architect, software engineer, and computer scientist, best known for managing the development of IBM's System 360 family of computers and the OS 360 software support package, then later writing about the process in his book, The Mythical Man Month. Dr. Brooks has received many awards, including the National Medal of Technology in 1985 and the Turing Award in 1999. Dr. Brooks, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Glad to be there. Thank you.
Dr. Brooks, we'll get started with our first question. You're renowned for many amazing achievements and your impacts on the field of computer science. However, if there was one non-technical thing that you could be known for, what would you want that to be?
That I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. And I became one when I was 31. I had been raised a loyal churchman, but I hadn't known Christ personally until my colleague Jerry Blau at IBM introduced me to what it really means to be a Christian. So that's the non-technical thing that's most important in my life. As I said, I was raised a nominal Christian, but my undergraduate education included a year of Old Testament and New Testament taught by a professor and an ordained minister who undertook to relieve all these undergraduates of their Sunday school faith and make the scripture appear unreliable. And so I was convinced. And then when I was 31, Dr. Jerry Blau, with whom I wrote a book later, invited my wife and me over to his house where he and Paula were hosting a small group studying the Bible. And Jerry clearly believed the scripture was dependable. And some years later, about 3 years later, after intense study and praying, I became a real Christian believer. So that's the story of how I became a Christian. And it's been an important part of my life ever since and still is.
Can you maybe touch on how it has been an important part of your life? Was there any events that have happened or anything that's occurred that's particularly important to you?
Well, life has ups and downs, and it has been a great comfort in the downs and added rejoicing in the ups. The ups being 3 children, a wonderful wife, 9 grandchildren, for example. So I find the teachings of the scripture and the fact that Jesus died for my sins to be a great comfort. And when one is almost 90, it means you have no fear of dying. And that's wonderful.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks, for your response. Moving on to the next question. Of all the projects that you contributed to, which one has been the most meaningful or fulfilling to you personally?
The 360 hardware development has been the most meaningful personally. We set out to change the world, and we did. Among the changes, we changed the whole industry from 6-bit bytes with only uppercase characters and numbers to 8-bit bytes, including lowercase characters, which made word processing possible. And that was adopted by the rest of the IBM product line and then by the rest of the industry. And so that's been very meaningful to me. That was the biggest internal debate that I've ever been a part of, was whether to do that. And it cost us an extra $100 million, 1960s dollars, to change all the input-out devices, all new printers, all new tape drives, all new discs, even the card punches had to be changed to accommodate 8 bits.
Were there any challenges that you faced in that project that particularly stand out to you?
Yes, there was originally we had proposed, IBM at that time had 2 product divisions that made computers. The data systems division made middle size and up. The general products division made middle size and down. And we had originally, I was a head of architecture for the data systems division. I was brought back from research for doing that. And we worked up a whole product line called the 8000 series. And I presented in an all-day meeting on January 61, I think. And everybody was carried away with it. We had to carry it through first level forecasting, first level cost estimating, first level market assessment, the whole business. And we had 3 products, a big, a small, and a middle, but in between in that product line. The small one wasn't really very small, it was middle size. And everybody was happy, except one fellow sitting in the back of the room. And that was company vice president Van Listen. And that night, my boss got transferred to Colorado. And a new boss from the other division brought in. And Listen told him, go in and assess that plan. If it's good, make it work. If it's bad, change it. So Bob came in and we fought for a while. We fought from January until March. And I carried the fight all the way to the corporate management committee. And I won. But Bob didn't quit. And he carried it back to him and he won. And then we fought like cats and dogs from January to March. At one point, he called me up. He said, Fred, I want you to know you got a raise. I was surprised. I said, thank you, Bob. I want you to know I had nothing to do with it. But then this meant HL throwing that plan away and adopting Bob's plan meant going to all different machines. And so he had a big reorganization meeting to decide who was going to be working on which project. Well, I was going back to research. I was just disgusted. And during that week, I went to the meeting up at Lake Saratoga to see where, make sure my boys landed on their feet in the reorganization. And to my amazement, when Thursday came, he came to me and said, will you take the new product line, which was the crown jewels of his plan. I was dumbfounded. You couldn't have knocked me over with a feather because we'd been fighting so hard. But I guess he thought I was a worthy adversary. And he became one of my closest friends as well as my boss for the next few years. A very big man.
That's an incredible story. Do you think that argument that you guys had, that the way that you guys fought for those 3-4 months, how do you think that changed like the future of technology from that point onwards?
Well, his proposal was that we wait until 64 with the new product line. And when there would be integrated circuits as instead of transistors. And that would give us the ability to make things about half the price. But it would mean fighting the competition with placeholders, essentially, for 3 years. And it was iffy as to whether we could do that. So that was part of the argument. But we built the first machines that they weren't even fully integrated, but they were batch-made transistors instead of handmade vacuum tubes. And so that was a big step forward. Instead of discrete transistors with little wires on them that placed by hand in the different circuits, not vacuum tubes. That was previous generation.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks, so much for the commentary on that last question. It was very insightful. Moving on, I guess something that's more close to home is, if you were an undergrad in today's year of 2021, what would you spend your extracurricular time learning, doing, or even building?
The most important thing I did in high school, college, in terms of my career, was public speaking, debate, oratory, extemporaneous, impromptu. I started in the 8th grade. I tried out for the high school varsity debate team because in my town, the 8th grade was part of high school. Well, all the big boys had gone to war. They finished high school in 3 years so they could join the service. That was 1944. And so I made the 4-person varsity debate team. I was paired with a senior girl, and we were debating the state topic, resolved that 18-year-olds should get the right to vote. We lost the first round, but that was the start of my public speaking career. And of all the things I did, that was at least as important as any course I took or any other part of my education. And it's part of my loss during my stroke that I can't speak as fluently as I did before, but I still have my Southern accent.
Just a tiny one.
Is there any one moment that you maybe remember where you thought, wow, I'm so happy that I studied public speaking? Is there any one talk that you gave that stands out to you or anything like that?
Well, I gave 3 addresses about the 360 family to the team that had developed it. And at that time, I thought I was leaving to come to Chapel Hill then. In fact, Tom Watson asked me to stay and see the software and alpha test. And so I stayed another year. But those were essentially farewell addresses. And that was an important occasion.
Why do you think, given that all you said about public speaking, that public speaking is such an important thing for college students to learn?
If you're in charge of a team, even building a 4-person team, you have to be able to rally the team on the one hand and convince your boss and on up that it's worth doing and explain why you're late and so forth. So the communication skills, if you haven't developed them in high school, that's a very important thing to do as an undergraduate.
That was a really insightful response. Thank you, Dr. Brooks. And I'm sure our peers will enjoy hearing about it. My next question, or our next question to you, is who is your greatest inspiration and why, of course?
Well, it would be Jerry Blau. He was a Dutchman who had studied at Harvard and got his PhD under Howard Aiken, as I did too. But he was on a Fulbright scholarship. And so when he finished at Harvard, he was required to go back to Holland for at least 2 years before staying in the US. So he left the Harvard Comp Lab the spring before I entered in the fall. So we didn't meet until 57. I got my PhD in 53 and he got his in 50. And in 57, this young Dutch architect joined the Stretch Project, in which I was a member. And he's the most, first place, he's a first-class computer architect, he was. He's died since. In second place, he's the most talented person I ever met. His wife had Alzheimer's, and for 10 years, he went every day to read and pray with her because she was in an institution. And then when she died by, quote, coincidence, I was visiting him, planning to visit him, coming in Saturday overnight flight. And I've come to the train station and no Jerry to meet me. And I called the house and the line's busy. And so finally I get a cab and go out to his house. And as I am coming, here comes one of his daughters who lives in Germany. And I say, "Why are you here?" And she says, "My mother died last night while I was on the plane." And so it was a total surprise. But I was able to be there for 3 or 4 days. And then a year later, I visited him and I said, "Jerry, how's it going?" He said, "Our Lord is very gracious. Alzheimer's means you die a little bit at a time. And so it's not as hard on you or the people you love." And I thought, that requires a certain spiritual depth to see this tragedy that way.
So, what do you think is the biggest impact that he left on you?
Oh, well, obviously, the Bible study which led to my conversion, but we wrote a book together on computer architecture, 1,200-page book. And so we had professional impact. He was one of the 360 architects. He was one of the structure architects, as I was. So he had important professional impact on his inventions. He wrote the manual for the 360 processor single-handed, which helped make it a very clean machine. The fact that it was one person and not multiple ones meant the micro decisions were made consistently. So, personally and professionally, he was important in my life.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. So now we'll go on to our next question. Your research has really set the stage for incredible research things that are happening right now in terms of hypothetical technologies like artificial general intelligence and cutting edge neurotechnology. So how important do you think ethics should be in computer science? Do you think ethics should take a back seat for greater technological advancement?
No. I think in the first place, I don't know many cases where skipping ethics would give greater technology advancement. So one would have one. But the thing about ethics is you have to deal with it case by case to formulate a consistent approach. So you get some very difficult situation running a project. For example, you have two people who can't get along with each other on the project. What do you do about it? Do you fire A? Do you fire B? I don't mean fire from the company, I mean fire from the project. In one case, it was a good example. On the 360 project, as originally organized, Jerry was in charge of the architecture. He had been on the 8000 series on the 360 project, but he had done a poor job of managing his people because he did all the work himself instead of harnessing the team. And the team included some very brilliant architects, and they were left kind of outside the decision making. So a hard thing I had to do ethically was tell my best friend that I was moving him out of that job and putting somebody else in charge. And that was an ethics problem, but it was clear what had to be done. He was still an important architect, but he was not in charge of all of them.
Do you think that ethics should be at the forefront of every computer scientist's mind as they try to tackle the new 21st century problems?
I don't think it has to do with at all with the problems. It has to do with people. And they haven't changed much in the last 10,000 years. So one of the things I enjoyed about the IBM I worked for was the founder, and then his son, Tom Watson Jr., believed that you had to treat people right and that you could not get fired for making a technical mistake. I remember one case, one of the executives made $1 million project mistake. And as I did myself in the software project, and he went to Watson and offered to resign. And Watson said, this was Watson Jr., said, no, I've invested $1 million in your education.
That's truly amazing. I have another follow-up for you. Do you think any ethical changes need to be made in the industry today with any companies that you can think of, or any workforce changes?
It's not just companies. The head of the company sets the tone, and it does matter a great deal. So Ken Elton founded Digital, and it had an ethical reputation. As I say, one of the things I enjoyed about working for IBM was you treat your people right. You couldn't get fired for making $1 million mistake, but you could get fired overnight for mistreating one of your people. And so that was important.
Absolutely.
And I was never as proud of any employer as I was of IBM when part-time through my 9 years there. Watson Jr. went on the horn worldwide, announced that every employee would be taken off hourly wages and put on annual salary. And that meant if you had a jury or sickness or whatnot, you got paid the same anyway. But that's not a cheap thing to do. But that was it helped the company a lot in avoiding union disputes, to stay ahead of union disputes.
Yeah, that's awesome. Sort of shifting away from people-centered ethics, one question that I had to follow up was, in today's day and age, a lot of technologies are developed with good intentions in mind. However, sometimes people can take those technologies and use them for bad things. Do you think that we should limit technological advancement just because people can do bad things with them? Or what is your take on using technologies originally intended for good that can sometimes be misused?
Well, I was invited to visit Wycliffe Bible Translators. And to my delight, that was one of my machines helping the Bible translators. And then later I was going through Grand Central Station in New York, and that was one of my machines casting horoscopes. So last time you win, some you lose.
Dr. Brooks, you're known as an innovative leader in our field. How have women impacted your experiences in computer science?
The one with the greatest impact on my life and career is my wife, Nancy. She was a physics major and a music minor as an undergraduate, and she got a master's in physics at Harvard. And so she was doing circuit design for IBM after we were married, and until she was started to doing child raising and teaching music for teaching violin for a career at home. Yeah. Well, when I was coming along, there were very few women who were interested. One exception, who was at the computation laboratory with Aiken before I was Grace Murray Harper. Grace was the inventor of COBOL, which was the first important programming language for business applications. And she was an impressive figure. Later, she had been a Commodore in the Navy during the Second World War, and she had been assigned to the computation lab, which was run as a Navy installation during the war. And she got her PhD there. She had studied mathematics at Vassar as an undergraduate. Grace was an interesting person. We had her give an invited lecture at our computer science department after she retired. Indeed, Congress made her a rear admiral, and she was fiercely proud of her Navy career. So she gave her invited lecture in full Navy uniform. When she went around lecturing, she would carry a 6-inch piece of wire and hold it up and said, "That's how far a signal will go in a nanosecond." And that helped us understand a lot of the limitations that are real. I had a chance to ride across the country in an airplane with her. It was coincidence, I reckon. And very interesting in many respects, hearing about her experiences with Aiken and comparing them with mine, because Aiken, who built the first American computer, was the architect of the IBM building. The Harvard Mark I was a character in his own right. Another important woman who the obituary was published in the communications at ACM was Fran Allen. Fran, together with John Cock, developed the whole optimizing compiler technology. They would take an ordinary Fortran program and make it run as fast as a handwritten program. It would do the same thing. So you write it in Fortran, and then the optimizer would shuffle it in ways to make it run faster. And Fran was a brilliant computer scientist and another Turing Award winner, as was John Cock. So I think I'm the only award winner who shared an office with two other award winners. Ken Iverson at Harvard was a junior professor when I was a graduate student, and I had a chance to be his TA. And so we shared an office. And he had a tremendous influence on my life. And then I shared an office at IBM. So Ken and I had an office together for 2 years. And among other things I learned from him was how to write and also to take a nap every day. And John Cox and I shared an office at IBM. And John is maybe the most inventive computer scientist of all time, although he would be competitive with that, with Marsh Wilkes, Sir Marsh Wilkes, who developed the first electronic computer. So, but Fran was a brilliant computer scientist.
So another question that we have is, what advancements in human/computer interface technologies do you see occurring within the next 50 years?
I'm a terrible prophet. As best I can do is 10 years. I've worked for the last 10, 20 years on virtual reality and augmented reality. I think we are going to see we're going to see widespread use of artificial intelligence. But I've always believed that a man plus a machine is better than a machine alone. So I think artificial intelligence is going to be merged with user intelligence more effective than it is today. There are already systems that use brainwaves to let people, for example, I have a son who has a handicap that limits how many hours a day he can use a keyboard. So he's beginning to explore with the scientists who are working on a brain-activated mouse for the clicking. And so this is just an example. It is not the positioning of the mouse so much as its limitation, it is clicking. Well, you can do that only so many hours a day with your foot. But on the other hand, when you try to do it with your brain, you have to keep focused so you click by mistake. So that's a good example of how I think the interface will change.
Thank you so much for answering those questions, Dr. Brooks. If you could, you have received both the National Medal of Technology and the Turing Award. Could you talk a little bit about what those awards meant to you and what the process of receiving them was like?
Well, the National Medal of Technology meant more to me than the Turing Award, because the Turing Award is just in the computer field, and the Medal of Technology is all over all technology. So the other people getting it at the same time I did, we included Steve Jobs and Wozniak for the Apple, and included the team that put satellites into space, Lockheed. So we were all in the White House together. And that was also colorful because of President Reagan. He began the gathering was held in the East Ballroom, and the Secretary of Commerce presided because they won the medal. And he talked to them, introduced and so forth for 30 minutes, or 15 minutes or so. And then he looked down the hall to the West Wing and he said, "Well, I see him coming." So we all stood up, of course. And then Reagan went to the podium and he said, "This is the first time technology has been discussed in this room since, I forget what year, 18 so-and-so. A young man named Alexander Graham Bell explained his new invention to President Zachary Taylor. President Taylor said, "Young man, that's fine, but I don't think it will amount to much." And then Reagan, who was the oldest person to have served as president up to that time, said, "I thought he was wrong at the time, poking fun at his old age." He was in fact 70, I think, but then later on the ceremony, there was an X marked on the carpet where he was supposed to stand for his photo op. And he wasn't standing there. He was on the other side of the stage with a young Navy first lieutenant who was mistress of ceremony. You could watch her sweat. How did she tell the president he's wrong and go move to yonder? But finally, she screwed her courage to the sticking place and said, "Mr. President, would you move over to the X?" And he grinned, and then he said, "You have to always do what the director tells you." And suddenly you were reminded he had been a movie actor all his life until he became a politician. But that modest self-joking, the other one was prepared, but this one was extemporaneous. So that was quite a ceremony. The Turing Award, like the other ACM awards, in many cases, you get to give it at one of the ACM conventions. And so, you have 2,000 people in the auditorium, and there's a nice award speech, and you give a lecture that you were going to give at that convention anyway. And so it doesn't have the opportunities for comic relief that the Medal of Technology did. Now, it's a very great award. And one of the nicest things has been that until this year, there's been a gathering at Heidelberg of the Turing Award winners and of the principal mathematics winners and 200 young researchers. And that has been enjoyable, both for we get the award winners together and to work with the 200 young researchers in small groups according to the interest. And the award winners, the ones, some subset every year, give lectures in their field, and they bring in one person from the Nobel Prize conference, and he gives an explanation of what he got his scientific award for. And I found that to be intellectually and socially interesting year after year. So that's a great occasion.
Well, thank you, Dr. Brooks. That was an awesome opportunity for us and the ACM Club, and I'm sure that our peers will enjoy watching this interview. Again, we thank you for your time. Yep.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Brooks. We really appreciate you taking the time today to speak with us. And we know that all of our members and all the undergrad computer science students at UNC will really appreciate this insight.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being invited, and I enjoyed your questions. And I wish I could be there in person with the audience. And I wish they could be there in person too.